All right, so now we're going to work on multiplying and dividing rational numbers, and we are going to start with writing fractions as negative numbers, and then to talk about equivalence. So I actually have a warm-up before that, and this is something you'll be writing in your journal, which is 21 divided by negative 3. So when we went over the integer rules, we mentioned that that negative divided by a positive divided by a negative was also negative in the same way that a positive divided times a negative would be negative. So we're just going to go ahead and write this as negative and then figure out what the actual answer would be. 21 divided by 3 is 7. Here, remember, we could do a couple things. One, we can sort of just see this as a fraction, right? 12 over 1 as a fraction, and then multiply straight across and get negative 24 over 3. And then now that we have this improper fraction, or rather fraction greater than 1, we can now divide, right? Because this fraction bar means division. And we know a negative divided by a positive will give us a negative 8. So that's one way we could approach that. And I'm just going to erase it to see what the second way is. Another way is that we could see this also as we know there's going to be division going on later on, and we want to get some of that division taken care of before we actually multiply. So I know that 3 and 12 share a common factor of 3. So I'm going to divide out 3 here, and I have 1. And I'll divide out 3 from 12 and have 4. And now instead of multiplying negative 2 times 12, I'm multiplying negative 2 times 4. And I have negative 8. And 1 times 1 is 1. So again, my answer is negative 8. It sort of saves us that extra step at the end. And here, a negative times a negative is a positive. So I mentioned how I like to sort of set it up like this, just a small preference. If you don't like to do that, then definitely don't. I probably didn't need to do that. I could just say 12. 12 is one of those numbers we sort of know the multiples of. But then here I put my decimal, and I want to move my decimal place one place over because I multiplied it by 1 and 2/10, not 12. Now, a negative times a negative is indeed a positive number, so I don't have to do anything with the sign. All right, so now let's get to equivalence, or just seeing what different ways to write fractions. So we already know that this fraction bar, in fact, means division. So by us doing 1 divided by 4, that is the same as 1 divided by 4, or 1 over 4, which would give us, and we worked on, can I write on this? Yeah. How many times does 4 go into 1, right? If I were to, in fact, write it as a decimal, it goes in 0 times. I bring down my 2, or my 0 rather, and now I have 2. 8 minus that, da, 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 da. Add another 0, bring that down. It goes in. All right, that was the step I was missing. 5 times. All right, there we go. So 2500ths, right? Now that's not what this is asking us to do, but this is another way to write it. So now we have this timeless question of where does the negative have to be in order for the whole entire fraction to be negative? Well, the negative just has to be anywhere on the negative. It can, or anywhere on that fraction. It could be on the numerator. This is a negative 1/4. It could, for some reason, be on the denominator. This still would give me a negative 1/4. And often we just sort of see it right here in front of the fraction, and that is a negative 1/4. Here, this is saying a negative divided by a negative, and that would be a positive 1/4. So these 3 fractions all mean the same thing: a negative divided by a positive divided by a negative, or just negative 1/4. Now we're going to do sort of a matching activity where we're trying to figure out which one of these on the left side match the sort of the letters on the right. So left and right. And the first one looks just like what we just did. We have a negative 4/3. So I'm going to look over here. Well, I know that's not obviously equivalent. Boom, 4 and negative 4 over -3. We know those are the same. Because it doesn't matter where the negative is, right? It still represents a negative 4/3. Now this is sort of different. 4 and 3/10 divided by 0. So what is something divided into 0 parts? Can I do that? Can I take let's say, well, they gave me 4 and 3/3 and divide it into 0. This is sort of a fun question for Siri, because if you ask Siri, what happens when you divide something by zero, they say that is impossible. You cannot do that. Because you can't take something that already exists as some kind of entity and divide it into nothing. The least it could be is one group, right? You can only divide it, the smallest group would be 1. Well, I guess you can divide into negative groups would be less than, well, anyway. So no, it doesn't, it is undefined. So that is undefined. And this is why I sort of do not like these lines because it gets sort of messy. So I'm just going to say this is E and we say F. All right. So now 4 divided by -8. I can rewrite that as a fraction. 4 over 8 or -4/8. So now, is there anything equivalent to -4/8, or is -4/8 over here? No, -4/8 is not, but its equivalency is, right? 1/2, -1/2 is the same as this, so I would call that A. So you basically see how we are sort of working our way through this set of problems. All right, so you're going to go ahead and continue that, and I'm going to move on. So now just like we did with our warm-up, we are going to circle the expressions that is not equivalent to the others. So let's see. I have one negative, so this whole expression is negative, and again, it's in front. This is on the top. Right here, well, I know a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so it doesn't look like it belongs. And yes, this is on the bottom, so that is fine. The same is true here. This negative goes to everything inside the parentheses, making it a negative expression. This right here is positive, right? I have -87 over a -49. So a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So right now we have 2. So this one's feeling a little lonely. And then indeed right here, we know that this right here means the opposite of negative. So that's going to be a positive. So this one does not belong. And so now you could probably just quickly identify, oh, actually, I like this one. There we go. I like that little challenge. So which one doesn't belong in this one? I have a -1 over 232, 1 over da da da, da 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 da. And here, what happens inside of here? So I have a negative divided by a negative, which would give me a positive. And then now a positive, which has a negative in front, becomes a negative as well. So which of these don't belong? I'm going to say they all belong. So that might be a trick kind of question for us. Okay, so that is all for this video. And hopefully, if you have questions on this, you can always just quickly go back and review.